Wake up, everybody. It's time for the History You Forgot podcast. It's the podcast where these three teachers with over 90 years of teaching experience help catch you up on the stuff that you slept through when you were young. Guys, today we're doing Korea and Vietnam, the forgotten war and the war you can't quite forget. It's coming at you next. I'm Jason Schmoida.
And I'm Jason Jones.
And I'm Jeff Breedlove. And I was just saying, that's what the greatest title. I think maybe one of the best titles we have so far.
It's a fun one.
It's a good one. Did you come up with that on your own?
Just say yes. Let's say I did. Let's just say I did.
All right. So I think, as Mr. Schmoida said, we're going to try to revisit. We've talked about Asia, Korea, and Vietnam, but topically, as parts of other conversations. And so we thought we would dive into those a little bit deeper.
The cool thing about this is we had a listener request.
Yes.
There we go.
So that's what we want.
Thank you, listeners. Right. That's right.
Shout out to Jill. He'll love that.
Thank you, Jim.
He'll love that. Yeah. No, we covered it with Cold War stuff, but it'd be nice to get a little bit of detail in here.
Yeah,
and that way we can go back and watch TV shows and movies that are popular in America, right?
Right.
25 years ago.
Yes. Exactly.
All right. So we are drinking today, but we're going to do something new. We have a shot, a B-52 shot.
Oh, yeah.
Clearly named after the bomber, the plane, right, that became sort of well-known during the Vietnam War, right? The cover bombing. And the story is there's dual stories about how they came up, right? So there is one, which is bartender in Alberta, Banff, Canada, came up with it, named it after his favorite band, right? The B-52s out of Athens, Georgia, which I'm trying to figure that out. Like, if that was an early 70s drink, the B-52s were like mid-70s, like 75, 76. So we'll see. But the others, Alice's Restaurant in LA, and it is then named after the bomber, right?
The bomb, yeah.
Yeah, the airplane, right? So it came up with it. So it is equal parts. It's kind of a floated drink, right? So it's, Mr. Schmoida did a good job here. He's got Kahlua, then we have Bailey's, and then we top it off with Grand Marnier. And then sometimes you can let them on fire.
Yeah.
Right? Which, you know how long it's been since first of all,
this is daunting because I don't do shots.
I was just going to say.
Yeah.
So as I do, can't you make this like a drink?
Yeah. I don't know why.
Well, let's do it.
They look good, though.
I tried to talk him into a Mai Tai, but he said, no, we're doing shots.
I think I'd rather take a shot than drink a Mai Tai.
About a Mai Tai, which is actually kind of the best part of like doing the drinks for the podcast, is that my bar glass collection has become like epic.
Right.
So every time you get a drink, I get like new glasses, and I would have loved to have a set of like tiki Mai Tai.
Yeah, we could have a little cola.
That I would never have used again.
Right.
You never know. You'll get theme parties in your future, probably.
Yeah, I know. I'm probably not a Mai Tai party.
Well, I kind of just want to get this done.
I don't care. Right. We'll see. All right. Cheers
to the podcast.
Yeah.
The silence.
Yeah, not bad.
The layers are good.
Yeah, you kind of get all three flavors
because you hit the burn of the Grand Marnier hits you first, but then it's immediately and then it's immediately kind of cooled off by the Kahlua
and the Baileys,
and then the Kahlua is that final kind of coffee touch to it.
Yeah, and then the orange really kind of comes through at the end there. So not bad. You know how long it's been since I've probably done a shot like that. I'm talking like, it's a good call.
I like that.
All right, so let's
and by the way, we're back to the old standard to finish the show.
Right. The shot's bad enough. I'm not going to then have come up with a whole nother drink. I'm going to go the old comfort boy, right? Exactly. So,
well, I'll start with a little context.
There we go.
So we're going to go back to World War II, and actually even to the 1930s, because we're going to talk about obviously Asia. The Asian part of the war, the Pacific theater, and you're talking about Japan. And Japan is an island country, as everybody knows, and they are right. They are striving to be a strong industrial country, right? This is you can argue the second wave of the Industrial Revolution, and they are striving to be an industrial country. And because they're an island country, they need natural resources. And Mr. Breedlove, you correct me here if I'm wrong, because I know we both teach this. I think we teach it the same way, but Japan and China had a little bit of a relationship where Japan had built some railroad in China to move natural resources. Japan wants to invade China because they want the natural resources and living space, which should sound familiar from when we talked about Hitler, who also wanted living space. Well, anyway, the railroads that Japan had built, they decide what they need to do to make the attack on China legitimate, or the invasion of China legitimate, is they're going to blow up a section of this railroad. And the idea then is China did this to affect our ability to get natural resources. So it's our excuse for an invasion of Manchuria, the part of China. So, and that's what Japan does. And so they take Manchuria, and actually much more of China. They really push into the interior of China. They control Korea.
For like a while.
Yeah,
it's like
for a while.
Century. Yeah.
And then, of course, they expand with Europe fighting. They expand through the islands of Asia down to almost Australia, not necessarily for natural resources, but picking off British and Dutch and French colonies because they're kind of into something else.
It is natural resources too, because there's oil
and ports.
Right, absolutely.
And so going from that into kind of a post-World War II, right? Japan's defeated. They signed the treaty on the USS Missouri, all that kind of stuff. And now we're getting into the Cold War. The United States is worried about, and most of Europe is worried about containment of communism. And so that Truman Doctrine idea that we're going to contain communism, we're going to pump funds, munitions, and in some cases troops into different areas of the world to try to keep Russia, or the Soviet Union, from spreading communism.
Or China in this case.
Or China now.
About that too. But the only other thing I would add, which I think is great, is that Japan, China, Russia, that whole sort of East Asia, they have a long history of conflict, right? So
right.
This isn't, when this conflict comes post-war, it's not necessarily a surprise, because it's been sort of a rough road. I mean, not only has Japan taken parts of China, but Korea, they've beaten China and won maybe 2 wars.
In Russia.
And Russia had another war, right? So, I mean, out of nowhere, right, they've come up. And Korea has always sort of been a colony of either China or Japan or Russia.
Right.
So it's a long time.
And I think the other important thing to mention is the fact that the communists want to contain democracy too, right?
Sure.
So that, and maybe that's obvious, but
we'll get more of an uphill battle.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, you could probably talk. The Truman Doctrine, clearly comes up first in Europe, Greece, the Greeks.
Greece and Turkey.
Right.
Yep.
Greece and Turkey are clearly after the war having some struggles in terms of is it going to be democratic? Is it going to be communist? And that's when Truman comes up with this idea that all you got to do is pick up the phone, right? And if you're having troubles, the U.S. will step in with money and advisors and all that. Anywhere that democracy is threatened, right? We're going to buy our way into a democratic world.
Right.
Asia is really kind of the first test of it.
It's weird because especially those first 4 years of Truman were amazing, because we had the bomb, we had lots of economic opportunities, we had power. We could send money to Greece and Turkey, we could fund the Marshall Plan, we could fund the Berlin Airlift, and we were pretty invincible doing it.
Right.
The question is, when this same issue pops up in Asia, we do handle it differently. And part of it is because now we're past the point of the Soviets having the atomic bomb. We're past China becoming communists.
Which 50 through
49.
49, 50. Right.
And so things get a little bit weird in Asia.
Yeah, I was going to say China is the player here that kind of throws, I think, the U.S. under the bus, right? So to remind you that the Chinese post-war, World War II, right, having been defeated multiple times kind of by the Japanese, a civil war erupts again. There was a civil war before World War II. It kind of pauses with World War II. It strikes up again. But by 1949, 1950, China has been taken by Mao and the communists. So now the Soviet Union has an ally in Asia. And then it's sort of, up for grabs, right? The whole world at this point is sort of becomes a bipolar. And so any post-World War II colonial territory, right? So we could talk about that too, I guess, is that after the war, European countries, France, Great Britain, like you said,
Yeah.
the Dutch, and
Yeah.
can't afford to keep their colonies anymore. And so then they're kind of become up for grabs, and then anywhere, not
Right.
just in
Everywhere.
Asia.
Africa. Yeah.
Right, everywhere. So it kind of becomes a thing. So yeah, so we've got China being communist, we've got Soviet Union now, the U.S. on a high, clearly post-war, and a nuclear world. I mean, what, 47 is Russia, or 40 something like that, isn't it?
49.
49. Okay,
It's
right after.
It was
Yeah,
because that and the Chinese Revolution within like 2 weeks of each other, I think.
I think, and now
Yeah,
that you said that,
very,
you're
very
right.
close.
So,
Yeah.
all right. So I think that pretty much then brings us up. I mean, that's kind of context, I think. Right?
Yeah,
Do
right.
anything else?
No,
That sets it up. I like
Okay.
that. What's the quote I saw? The World War II is the blockbuster film, and these wars that come after them are the sequels that no one can agree upon, right? That nobody likes as much. That sort of the
Not quite as good.
the fallout, but it doesn't quite line up right.
It's The Godfather 3.
It's The Godfather 3,
right, exactly.
Rocky 5.
No, it's just we were just talking about China. It'll come back to me. It's no big deal. But I was going to say that the U.S. also. I mean, as you kind of put this out there, nobody wants another war, right? I mean, post World War II, we kind of revert, even though we are now a clearly dominant. Nobody wants another situation like anywhere.
Well,
we end up with proxy wars.
If we can throw money at it, it's so much easier.
Right. And if you think about it, Korea is 5 years after the end of World War II.
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
1950. I mean, it is a quick turnaround.
Not long
And it becomes the first proxy war.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Yeah.
a war fought by two other combatants but who don't actually fight.
Right.
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 So that kind of puts us, I think, in your territory.
Well,
there, Mr.
I mean,
Schmidt.
it boils down to the Cairo Conference right after World War II gave Korea its independence, and almost immediately factions began to kind of form. There was sort of the communist faction and I'll just say non-communist faction, right?
Yeah. That's a good way to put it.
From there, it was the newly formed UN now that kind of stepped in and said, hold on, let's not have a major conflict here. Let's just make a truce.
Well, and the UN is new. I'm getting all excited about the UN. But post World War II, too, right?
Yeah,
So it's
right.
kind of testing ground for that, too.
And I guess the idea was let's halfway point 38th parallel. If you look at a map, midway point of Korea is the 38th parallel. Let's just draw a line. And let's just say that Kim Il-sung and the communists, you guys stay north of that line. It was Syngman Rhee, who was I keep continuing to say non-democratic or non-communist leader because he was not very democratic or popular. And the idea was to work it out. Right. To work out some deal, to find a coalition government, to do something.
Were
that
they
would
going to
settle
have
things.
an election? They were going to have like an Korean election. And that sort of didn't work. I mean, no side would allow it. Right.
Well, in the UN, like you said, that's new. And you had the League of Nations after World War I, which was a U.S. idea that they weren't a part of.
Yeah.
And you've never had an international organization with any teeth.
Yeah.
Right. And so now you've got an international organization that's trying to have some teeth and some military, constructs.
Yeah.
Baby blue helmets.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and the UN plays an interesting role in all this anyway, because when Kim Il-sung's communist North Koreans invade, I'm going to say North Vietnam when I mean to say North Korea like 12 times. I guarantee it.
Just reach out, hit him.
When Kim Il-sung's invasion of South Korea, there's a UN resolution. And the resolution is to say, in the war or action will be taken to put you back at the 30th parallel. And it was the Soviets that skipped that meeting. And now you had mentioned, Jeff, that you thought that was to protest the idea. But the irony was they missed the opportunity to veto it. Was it that they already knew it was going to happen?
I think it's one of those things where the way the Security Council works, right, is that any of the superpowers post World War II, China, Russia, U.S., Great Britain, France, at any point, right, any sort of UN action can be vetoed by any one of them.
Right.
Right. So if Korea becomes an issue and the Soviets skip the meeting where the vote of the Security Council is, then they get to kind of register maybe it's okay without actually having to vote yes.
Yeah.
Right. And they're able to kind of then save a little face.
Sure.
Like, maybe the conflict is coming. The Soviets by 1950, I'm sure, are going to probably not that they want a conflict. I'm not trying to say that, but now that they're nuclear, now that they're no longer a U.S. ally that they were during the war. I mean, it's a Cold War, like you said, situation.
And I'm going to try to relate this to today a little bit, because one of the things you hear about today with us being in a war in Iran is that Russia and China like that because our focus is not on other things economically, what they're doing necessarily. And I know this is hypothetical, right? But
The what if?
yeah, it could be a similar situation in 1950, right? The U.S. is the world power, right? Now the Soviets have gotten the bomb, but hey, if the U.S. is focused on Korea, I don't know.
Just a thought. It's a really good thought, actually. I think.
And I think it's just a chance. I mean, there's all sorts of speculation. I think the fact that the USSR does not vote gives them the ability to save face, right? Because they're not voting against other potentially communist countries, but that they're also sort of aware that maybe there needs to be something because it's a proxy war, right? I mean, they're not going to have to directly hit the U.S. It's all going to be about somewhere else. But I think that also brings up, and then we'll come back. The two men who end up running both North and South Korea are both kind of interesting too. You say that. Right. So Kim Il-sung, which begins this whole Kim dynasty of like authoritarian cult of personality. You literally just Google the funeral of Kim Il-sung and watch. It was like a 10-day mandatory. It's crazy to watch some of this stuff. He actually was born in Korea, but then spent most of his childhood in China, and then became a communist early, and then kind of fought in that whole sort of communist Chinese civil war, but then spent time in the Soviet Union and had slowly risen up through the ranks of the sort of Chinese Communist Party and was so chosen by the communists in China to eventually then go to North Korea. They had no plan that it was going to become his. It was going to be a puppet, clearly. Rhee, on the other hand, really the only thing kind of going for him is he's pro-U.S.
Right.
And he's anti-communist. But besides that, not democratic, clearly authoritarian, not at all popular among, and kind of crushes the economy, not a good ruler. I mean,
that enemy of my enemy is my friend thing bites us in the ass a lot.
I was just going to say, there's like all sorts. When you said that, I'm like,
we're always looking for that pro-U.S. person.
Oh my goodness!
Always looking for
so many examples of that.
Right. The lesser of two evils, right? So he's pro-U.S., but we're going to ignore the fact that he's whatever else, like Shah of Iran.
Right. But that's super interesting. I actually didn't know that about Kim Il-sung.
Neither did I until we chose this topic, and I'm like, you know what?
Sense in the world.
It does,
and lifelong learner, Mr. Breeden.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I appreciate that. But no, I thought it was interesting because you always wonder how these sort of dictators come to power. And it very, very short story, because we'll keep going, is that he eventually sort of asserts little by little this sort of power over the Chinese. The Chinese post-Korean War, which we'll get to, don't want to start a war, right, with North Korea. He's the one who actually decides to invade South Korea without China's approval. So, I mean, he's kind of exercising, and then he, like, a lot of his enemies or people who could have challenged him just disappear or end up dead in a crazy situation.
What you see a lot with authoritarian leaders.
I was just going to say, right?
Yeah, and I don't want to book into it too far, but if you jump all the way ahead of us in case we forget to say it at the end, I mean, China's allied with North Korea, but North Korea tends to be that annoying little brother that gets in trouble a lot. You know what I mean? Where sometimes China, you can tell they're helping, but they're rolling their eyes loud as can be at the same time. And
which I think brings us in. So when we eventually get to this 38th parallel, that's the Geneva Accord.
Well, that's not Geneva, but that was just a UN resolution. I don't remember the number.
So then eventually we end up with an accord that's going to set up two separate Koreas.
Well, not until we get to the peace treaty. Not until we get to the ceasefire.
Okay, so I'm off on that.
You think you're thinking Vietnam? There's the Geneva Accords Vietnam. With the war in France, but we'll get there.
Right,
we'll get there. I don't know.
Never seen the Korean War.
We know I make things up.
50.
It's kind of a thing.
And we're done.
50.
By 1950, right? So we've got a war though because the North invades the South.
North invades the South, and they've cut through South Korea pretty quickly, and they're pressing down on the last port at the southern tip of South Korea called Pusan. And it's known as the Pusan Perimeter. And that was originally going to be our goal, was to go protect the Pusan Perimeter. And there was really heavy, serious fighting down there at the Pusan perimeter. But it was MacArthur, not General MacArthur. What's MacArthur's first name?
Douglas.
Golly. Douglas MacArthur, who had a genius idea to invade north, almost at the border there at the 30th parallel, at a port city also called Incheon. And then the United States would just, from Incheon, invade North Korea, which meant that all the troops that were pushing down to the Pusan perimeter toward Pusan would have to turn around to defend North Korea.
So you were going to cut it off in half.
It's like, how do I say that?
Divide and conquer the troops.
Well, yeah.
Perfect.
Kind of like,
But and it worked.
It worked. It worked big time, because not only did the Koreans have to retreat and go all the way back to defend North Korea, but we cut pretty quickly through North Korea. Now, that's where things got weird very
that's when
quick.
China gets it. China gets it.
Yeah. Well,
Probably with a little bit of help of the or at least like you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
and honestly, with a little help from Douglas MacArthur.
Right.
Well, MacArthur, we get very close to the Chinese border, and
Oh yeah,
MacArthur
the Yalu
starts,
River.
and MacArthur
See,
starts petitioning to Truman fairly publicly to going to China. This is our chance. We didn't stop the Chinese Revolution last year when it happened. This is our chance. And he suggests to a few journalists even that we have a nuclear bomb, we should use it. And so there's a
Seriously?
suggestion of that. And there's a lot of back and forth and some almost pretty public arguing between the two. And this is where Truman has to fire Douglas MacArthur, which is really controversial. You think about it, he's like the hero of World War II, right?
Hero of the Pacific for sure.
Right. Interestingly, though, in the couple years following that, MacArthur came home and kind of did what a lot of, upset, famous military people might do, which is get on TV and radio and talk to people about it.
Wait, what?
Voice their complaints.
You have a career in that?
Right.
But it wasn't long before the American people realized this guy had kind of a classic God complex.
MacArthur did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
MacArthur had a class, and
He thought he was really cool.
thought he was inevitable. Thought he was invincible, I guess would be the right word there. And then we could go in and we could just nuke China. I think most people, by the end of the Korean War, they weren't happy with the war. They weren't happy with Truman, but they understood why Truman got rid of MacArthur because of
You
that.
can't just drop a bomb on
Because
China.
It brought the Chinese in the war, and then the Chinese kicked our butts back to the 38th parallel.
Right? Yeah.
And then, honestly, most of the war is that stalemate. Because what I just described, I think I put this in the notes somewhere. I'm trying to look for the dates. Between June and October of 1950, everything I just explained happened.
And then it kind of
Then it was a stalemate.
Yeah. And if you've ever watched MASH.
I was just going to say, which lasts like 3 times longer than the actual war.
Right. But if you've ever watched it, a lot of the war, you wonder, like, every 10th episode, there was bombing.
Right. There was actual war.
And that kind of is how that war went after that stalemate.
Well, it was
set in, so.
different than Vietnam, that it wasn't jungle fighting.
Right.
There was a lot of cold weather fighting.
Very cold.
Right.
Yeah.
It was
Cold and hot. They had the extremes.
It
was very hot, very cold. Yeah.
But
both.
It's further north, I think, than people
Yes.
think it is.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
That's a great point, actually, because it's completely different, which is probably, and I'm just going to maybe explain my ignorance here, but probably why by the time Vietnam comes around by the late 50s, when we're actually involved, we don't know what to do because we've never fought one like that. Because even Korea was not that kind of war.
The last jungle fighting we probably did at all was in the island hopping to Japan.
Right, absolutely.
Right. Well,
and that was also a little different too, because you weren't bogged down. You were just right.
I have heard people say that Okinawa and Iwo Jima, those last 2 battles before in Japan in World War II, should have been maybe lessons for us before we went to Korea and Vietnam both.
Right.
But
well, yeah, because the Japanese definitely dug in and had tunnels, and the Vietnamese did that, as well.
Mm-hmm.
So then the war only lasts 3 years.
Yeah,
only. I mean, but I read something like 1 million to 3 million Koreans.
Yeah.
I mean, are killed in sort of in between the two, right? How many soldiers did America lose? Did you know?
36,570.
That's what I was going to say. How many Americans died in that war?
Yeah.
My uncle fought in it. I remember that, but he spent probably most of his time in the brig. That was the family story, at least as he went.
Yeah.
But except for Korea.
To me, the interesting thing is that it's the first, coming off of the major successful campaigns in World War II to this, that stalemate caused people to start to grump, right?
To do what?
Grump. People didn't like that. Is grump a word?
I'm not sure, but I'm
I don't know,
going with
but
it. I was
I'll
going
get
with
you.
that.
That
I'll get you.
B-52 shot made my face just like so hot.
You look fine.
It's bright red. I can
You
tell.
look fine.
It feels bright red right now. Yeah. Anyway,
It's like we're married.
totally.
You could-
Gosh,
you
I'm
could-
like,
you could-
ooh, all of a sudden.
This is the old man
This is the
drinking
old
a
man.
shot.
Right,
Right.
right.
That's the
Yeah,
problem.
shouldn't do shots like that.
Right. Exactly.
But in 1952, there's a presidential campaign, right?
Okay.
Truman is no longer running, but a Democrat named Adlai Stevenson is running, and he's got this not very good record on Korea to run on. And he's running against one of the most popular generals from World War II, also named Dwight D. Eisenhower.
From
who's running
Abilene, Kansas.
From Abilene,
Yeah.
Kansas. That's right. Yeah. Who's running as a Republican. The interesting thing, I always thought this was cool. Eisenhower, when World War II ended, had never declared a political party. And both parties after the war approached him,
bet.
Right.
like, we'll make you president. And, he has history in Texas and history in Kansas, both.
Oh, really?
I think he
didn't
was
know that.
born here and maybe lived in Texas for a significant part of his life. I don't remember the whole life story, but it makes sense that he would adopt the Republican
Sure.
Party on top of the fact that policies at that point probably matched his personality and the way he thought.
Well, what he'd been through.
Yeah, and what he'd been through. But his campaign in 1952, a lot of it was, we will not fight limited wars like this, and I will get us out of Korea, and we won't do something like that again.
Really?
And it was a
So
successful campaign.
he was kind of a
Yeah.
dove in terms
Yeah.
of,
Yeah.
okay. I mean,
I bet old Ike would have liked our bourbon from Fox Hill Wine Experience.
I he would have liked our bourbon from Fox Hill
I-
Wine Experience. That is a good time for a plug, I guess
Yeah.
we
it's like you should cut a commercial.
Right?
need to put it in the outline.
And one other thing I want to say, if anybody from the Kansas City area is watching,
Yeah.
right, we've got 2 presidential libraries within about
Right,
3
right.
hours of our
It's a
city.
great
right?
plug.
We've
Yeah.
got the one in Abilene for Eisenhower.
Yeah.
And which is his boyhood home, the library, some really cool statues from.
Have you been?
I've not been in the library, but I've been on the property.
Okay. I have not.
Outside the library, but
Yeah.
it was a Sunday afternoon on the way back from Colorado. And then, of
That's-
course, Truman in
Yeah.
Independence.
Yeah, that Truman Library
Which is
amazing.
Amazing.
Crazy.
It's great.
Amazing library.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Both
But
really good.
that's kind of ironic that actually there are 2. I mean,
Yeah.
I doubt very many places have. Well, yes, Truman's at technically in
Well,
Missouri.
And
Right.
back to back, if you want a history of the 1940s and 50s,
Do we?
but I mean, I'm just saying, like, yeah, you could go to the Truman Museum and
yeah.
get a
Well-
significant amount of the 30s,
Oh,
40s,
You
50s,
never even
and
thought
then,
about that.
yeah.
It's like a perfect
Oh,
sort
yeah.
of, yeah.
Yeah. So I think if we're going to get to Vietnam today,
Right.
I think we need
can
to
finish
make-
this.
I think we need to make the comment that there's
let me just
a
ask one.
ceasefire,
I was just saying,
not a treaty.
Yes.
so it's not even technically a war.
Well,
Yeah.
it's a police action.
Police
I
action.
was just going to say, like, Korea never
A
declared
UN
a war.
resolution
Right.
allowed the UN nations to, so it wasn't necessarily a congressional declaration of war. We haven't declared war since World War II, though.
Okay.
Right.
So
Yeah,
we end up just a stalemate ends up in a truce.
Yeah. Well, because a couple things have to happen, and it starts with Eisenhower being elected.
Okay.
And the next step is Stalin died.
53.
And that's important because Joseph Stalin was the one in the Soviet Union, literally, I think the one who still wanted to fund this thing. And once he died, the rest of the leadership in the Soviet said, we're not funding this
Which is a
anymore."
whole separate episode, right?
Which
right.
left
Yeah.
Kim Il Sung.
Um,
You gotta do something.
Right, you got to get out of this.
Yeah. And so the truce or ceasefire became the agreement that's still in place.
I was going to say, because
Yeah, it's-
technically it's never ended.
That's still considered a war.
Or
I-
whatever. they
or
call
whatever.
it, Right.
I accidentally in class one time said, and the same soldiers that are guarding the 38th parallel are
Mhm.
still there.
It's like,
Right? But
Yeah.
Yeah.
that was not the same.
not the
guy.
same
Right.
exact
That's
same.
But can you
Right.
get that image in your head? It's
Yeah.
kind of funny of these old men, like 95-year-old.
But yeah, and that's why we see, you can go to
Only history never fun. Right.
the 38th parallel there, and you can see both North and South Korean troops standing. Right.
Yeah,
at
it's
the
probably the last remaining Cold War like artifact. I mean, literally,
Yeah.
like it's still a DMZ separated by land.
demilitarized zone.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy that it's still there.
Yeah.
Right? That after all
Yeah.
this time, but so it ends though, right? And everyone thinks we're good. North Korea becomes communist. South Korea becomes
The
Not-
democratic,
right, not
ish
communist.
at that. It got more democratic over time.
Right. Well, I was just going to say, which I think is interesting before we hit Vietnam real quick, is that by the 1960s, North Korea is actually sort of like has a higher standard of living than South Korea because you and I would know this that Kim Il-sung adopts like a 5-year plan, right? And collectivizes agriculture and does all the things that everybody else had done.
Yeah.
So there's this like slight growth, and South Korea becomes sort of a chaotic, unstable democracy. So for the 60s, that was like very interesting point, I thought. But clearly, I mean, then it goes like this. I mean, is it like
switches?
It probably
very
lines up.
quickly.
Go that lineup about at the same time that like West Germany and Japan were taking over the
And-
tech industries, and South Korea sort of jumped on those
and
coattails.
the switch in power of like from Reed to the second guy.
Okay.
The first Korean Republic when Reed is like ousted, and then the second guy comes and
I
goes,
should know that, but I don't.
why should you know
I
that?
don't know. I don't know who that is. Who would it be? I can't remember.
It'll come,
Yeah, it makes sense though.
but it does make sense. So it's like
Yeah.
60s. It's like it starts to ramp up, but probably good timing wise.
Yeah.
But then we come back to my Geneva Accords and
Okay.
Vietnam.
Well, yeah. So that
you-
war ended.
Do context real quick.
Yeah,
French,
yeah.
just so we
Yeah.
know.
So President Truman,
It's a nice
when
segue.
we're talking about Vietnam, President Truman supported the French. It was a French colony,
Indochina.
Indochina. Yep, and he supported the French because the United States kind of had a theory called the domino theory, and the fear was if one country fell to communism, we would see a domino effect of multiple fall, and so he wanted to support the French in their attempts to control Vietnam and make it a democratic government.
You know, a really interesting side note.
Yeah,
Sorry,
'cause
I
I have
know.
a question. So you do your side note, then I have a question for you.
Franklin Roosevelt was negotiating with Ho Chi Minh.
Hmm.
Ho Chi Minh, it was,
Wait, like in the 40s?
yeah. So Ho Chi Minh goes all the way back to like World
Yeah.
War One with
Oh,
Wilson.
forever.
even.
Yeah, he's been around forever. All right.
So Ho Chi Minh had used his forces basically to defeat the Japanese during World War II. And he and Roosevelt were negotiating some independence opportunities. Maybe Roosevelt could talk to the French and get the French out of there and we could avoid. And Roosevelt, by a lot of people's, take, was willing. But by the time the war ended, Truman, the Truman Doctrine, the emergence
Roosevelt's dead.
of the Cold War bipolar thing, Truman couldn't do it.
Well, I think it's important too that you said that the French post World War II, like most European countries, are sort of economically devastated.
Yeah.
So they don't want to necessarily leave their colonial empire because it's still financially beneficial, but it costs them a huge amount of money. Plus, there is this era of nationalism, right? So the Vietnamese are like, we're not French,
Right.
Right.
And they're not even Indo-Chinese, whatever that is.
Well,
right. I mean,
It's kind of interesting historically too, like with Panama and Vietnam or Indochina, where France has failed and the U.S. kind of just steps into the void.
that's a good point.
feels-
Panama, that's a good
Yeah.
one. Yeah, so like this, it all comes kind of to a head, right? Like,
Right.
and there's like a battle at Dien Bien Phu, right? Who the
Okay.
French lose to a group of Chinese nationalists.
Yeah.
And France is like, we got to
Yeah,
get
I'm
out.
out.
We're out. And that then creates a vacuum.
And it's 1954. That's the Geneva Accords, where
Which, by the way, is only 1 year post Korea.
1 year
Right.
later, right? That's
Right.
what's
I mean-
crazy about it is the blueprint. Okay, let's do the same thing. So instead of dividing North and South Korea at the 30th parallel, now we're looking at Vietnam. We'll divide it at the 17th parallel. So if you just go a little south on your map, you'll find Vietnam down the coast of the Indochina Peninsula. And the idea is, all right, we'll do the same thing. We'll hold elections. Eisenhower was smart enough to know, okay, wait a minute. This guy who is the communists in North Vietnam is wildly popular. He helped defeat the Japanese. He led the war against the French. An election, people will choose him.
Right. This is Ho Chi Minh.
Yeah, Ho Chi Minh. And so Eisenhower was like, we're not doing that. And basically, I think the United States was at least instrumental in getting those elections canceled so that they didn't happen. So what Eisenhower
So
did-
without the U.S. interference,
Yeah.
it could have literally been like a independent nation, all one.
Yeah.
Without,
Yeah, but here's the thing. Imagine in 1954, in the heart of the Cold War,
right.
a democratic election producing a
Chooses.
communist country.
That's awesome.
We just couldn't have it. We couldn't allow that to happen. And so Eisenhower's response then was, well, no limited wars. I'm not putting troops on the ground. I'm not doing another Korea. So instead it was aid and advisors. It was the military advisors to try to help the South Vietnamese defeat the North Vietnamese, and money and weapons to do it, which that sounds
Training.
familiar to us too in the
Yeah.
modern world. We know that's how that works.
Which I think is interesting because people always think Vietnam was the 60s, late 60s, early
Yeah.
70s war, but this is late
54.
50s.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and we're already
Now-
clearly involved.
Now, the combat didn't
Because-
start,
Right.
but Eisenhower and Kennedy were the two presidents that kind of handled Vietnam at arm's length, trying to give them aid and advisors. Kennedy increased aid and advisors. Kennedy actually authorized some covert stuff that got some people killed. Like the first casualties of Vietnam, American casualties, were under Kennedy. Some covert operations, some things that were classified, whatever, at that time. But then
It was after Kennedy's death, right? That
Right.
that ramped up for the
That
U.S.
makes sense.
bit-
63. Yeah.
again, man, the timing of some of this stuff just kills you. Like,
okay, so real fast.
no,
you say
do,
that.
do.
No. Like in my brain now, when you kind of overlap it, I don't think I've ever sat there and done like Korea, Vietnam,
Yeah,
Kennedy's assassination, like
Mhm.
sort of a through timeline.
Yeah, and Kennedy's assassinated 63, right?
Yeah.
And so in
November, yeah.
64 is the Gulf of Tonkin incident.
Well, one step
Right.
back.
Okay.
One step back. But yeah, we're about there. 2 weeks ish before Kennedy's assassination, Ngo Dinh Diem, who was the president of South Vietnam, the guy we were supporting, he was the non-democratic or the non-communist, not very democratic leader of South Vietnam
I see a pattern.
that everybody hated, that nobody liked. Same idea, right? Same kind of blueprint. But he was assassinated by his own military. The military staged a coup. And there is strong evidence to believe that the United States knew it was coming
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
and just turned a blind eye.
That's what I read last night, is that there is like, it was implicitly okayed ahead of time.
We don't want to say we supported it and couldn't do that. But if we pretended, oh, dang. Now, the problem is that for Kennedy, he's left with the decision.
So is that like 63? So
63.
Okay.
It's literally November of 63,
Got it.
days before Kennedy's killed. And he's trying to figure out, what do I do? And his choices seem to be, from the letters we've collected, to both professional and personal people that he's writing to: get in, get out.
Right.
Like, forget this aid and advisors. We need to do this or not do it at all. And many people think he was leaning towards not doing it at all.
There's a what if.
So then Kennedy's assassinated. Well, guess what? Texas Democrat vice president now, Lyndon Johnson, takes office, and he's under intense pressure pretty quickly. We need to do something about this. And the Republicans were very harsh on Democrats during the Cold War as being soft on communism. And Johnson was not going to be a Democrat being soft on communism.
Being from Texas.
Right.
And in 1964, quickly, some incidents took place.
Yeah. So the Gulf of Tonkin
The Gulf of Tonkin.
incident.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, which is basically North Vietnamese ships engaging a U.S. ship.
Ish.
Ish. Yeah, I mean, there's some
Right.
torpedoes, I think, shot at the U.S. ship that isn't hit.
When you say
Um,
ish, is it another sort of like wag the doggy kind of a thing? Like maybe
I
it was
think
a
there was
false
machine gun
flag?
fire. There
The
was
first one was legit,
Okay.
we think. Again, some people are going to argue that neither of them happened. There were two incidents. The one where a torpedo was seen by a sonar operator, then there was a torpedo that hit something, right?
but not our ship.
Not our ship. Then a couple of days later, another report of torpedoes fired at American ships. That second report turned out to be dolphins.
Okay.
Like, literally.
So
And it was an overexcited sonar operator who was thinking about torpedoes.
right,
But
and that
the long-
leads to the Gulf of Tonkin
And that's-
resolution.
And that's the quick jump to that.
Yeah.
Which is
Which gives President Johnson the ability to use the U.S. military as he sees fit.
so it's like a
Vietnam.
War Resolution Act.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
It's
because
not-
the president, without Congress
without
has approved-
declaring war.
Congress
Yeah.
has approved.
The
go for it.
Congress is yes.
So my question for you then is,
Mhm.
with this get in, get out that in theory Johnson is going to jump on,
Yeah.
did they actually believe that they could sort of overwhelm the North Vietnamese so quickly that it would be kind of another surgical couple years and then we're out?
But it wasn't really overwhelming as much the North Vietnamese. Johnson's initial plan was twofold. One, bomb the crud out of North Vietnam. And that was the part that maybe fits into that narrative of overwhelm them. We call it carpet bombing, right? That's where our B-52s come from, right? The B-52s, and more bombs were dropped in campaign Operation Rolling Thunder than all of World War II.
Which also includes, because I've read this, Laos.
In a bit.
But,
You know,
like,
yes.
but the bombing is not just Vietnam.
Was
Right.
the B-52 also called the Flying Fortress?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought that
Yes.
just because it was so huge.
Yes.
It was such a huge plane.
Oh, was it one of those like, gigantic winged things? That you
Yes.
saw?
Yeah.
How many bombs could?
Ooh.
I don't know
Like
that.
literally, you could just like drop a crap ton of bombs.
I think
And that's why they call it carpet bombing.
Yeah,
I believe.
Right. I mean,
because it
like
was
each
just
plane just boom.
Yeah. It's literally like laying.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
The
So-
videos of that are kind of interesting. If you ever, YouTube.
All you got to do is watch,
Right.
any kind of, Oliver Stone movie.
Yeah.
And you're
Well,
going to
there's
see
just
it.
real footage of it. That's the
No,
cool thing
well,
about
yes,
Vietnam.
yes.
Is there's so much actual footage of Vietnam, like more than
Which
any
is a
other
whole separate
war,
topic here.
more
right?
than
Right.
any other
Well,
war
that's-
we have. So
That's
much
also
footage.
why the American public turned against
Yeah.
it so much.
Yeah.
So
It was on the news every night.
Let me see if I know. I
Let's
don't want
do
to
it.
really.
No,
Let's
we're
just do this
Go.
when we need to do it. But I want to kind of get this back. So the idea was bomb the crud out of North Vietnam. In South Vietnam, the goal was much trickier. It was something that Johnson called pacification. If you think about a pacifier, it shuts the baby up, right? And you want to stomp down the Viet Cong. That's probably where we need to start getting into a little bit of terminology here. In South Vietnam, not North Vietnam where the communists were, but in South Vietnam, there were the Viet Cong. The Viet Cong were the guerrilla fighters. Their actual technical name was the National Liberation Front. And they were supportive of the communists in North Vietnam. And they were wreaking havoc in South Vietnam because you don't know who they are, where they are. They were in towns, villages, and cities all over the country, stirring trouble against the government, Nguyen's former government, now that has no leader, really, at that point, right?
And see, that always confused me.
Sure.
How the Viet Cong set in, how it played out.
I always tell my kids, like, if pick a place on earth, drop yourself in the middle of it, and try to figure out who the good guys and the bad guys are, because they don't wear t-shirts.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's
Yeah,
in
they're not wearing
essence,
hats.
right. And that's in essence what we were trying to do in South Vietnam. And unless it was a sniper in a tree with a gun, you didn't know.
Well,
You didn't
which is going to lead, which to your point, is going to lead to all sorts of these sort of, I hesitate to say war crimes.
Well,
But
in some cases, yeah.
when you talk about the protests,
Right.
right, eventually the war is
Well-
going to clearly pick up steam.
Yeah.
Like Johnson's got to keep engaging. I think 200,000 troops hit the ground pretty quickly.
It goes from 50,000 ish to over 500,000.
Right, like super fast.
Right. And you're talking about war crimes, and the things that you're talking about are like the stories coming back in the news where a whole town is wiped out by U.S. troops.
Massacre. You
Because-
got right.
Yeah.
But I think
They don't know who's bad or good.
I was going to say the justification has always been we go into a village and we are looking for Viet Cong.
It's called search and destroy.
Nice.
Is
Is it really?
Yeah, search and destroy.
And
Yeah.
we're not saying that the U.S. military did anything wrong here. We're just saying they didn't know what they were doing.
Well, it's not.
I mean, you know what I mean?
no,
we're not
but
trying
I
to
think-
pass judgment. That's what I'm
It's
trying
not.
to say.
It's no. I would
Right.
put it this way. It's not the military's plan for their soldiers to do these things.
Right.
These
It's
soldiers were
individual
sometimes put in
soldiers.
really
Right.
bad situations and
Right.
made really bad decisions in
Right.
those really bad situations.
Sure.
Like Milai is Lieutenant Calley, right? We found out
Right.
that happened in, I think it was 1968. But we didn't
Mhm.
find out it happened until 1970 or 71 with the
After,
Pentagon
yeah.
Papers. But he was told to rid the village of communist influence. He searched the whole village. He found remnants of the Viet Cong, but couldn't find anybody and he lined them up and killed them. Lined them up and started shooting men, women, and children. Now, that's a terrible decision. That's not what we wanted him to do. But who knows what he'd gone through over the 6 months. Oh, no, God dang it. I'm not defending him, right?
You're fine.
I am absolutely not defending him. But we know that a lot of times soldiers were not in the best
Well,
condition.
And I think it
Well,
goes to your point that,
Yeah.
like, you're fighting a foreign war,
Right.
in a country that is defending, they believe, their homeland.
Yeah.
You got U.S. troops who are looking for what they believe are counterinsurgents or whatever.
Yeah.
And
It's an
they-
impossible
and
task.
anybody in that place, you said they're
Well-
wearing t-shirts. So you have this sort of trigger reflex.
absolutely. And when you
Intended.
when you
Yeah.
when you
Yeah.
watch children walk into up to your buddies and you think they just want to talk to your buddies and a grenade blows up,
Yeah.
and your buddies die along with the kid. I mean, I can't imagine.
I think
Yeah.
history has been kinder over time, sort of to the Vietnam War. I mean, initially, I think it was horrific in terms of
Yeah.
people assumed.
Yeah, and I think that what I always tell students is you don't have to approve of the war,
No.
but you always should support our troops.
You don't have anything
who
to
have
say.
they don't have a
Right,
choice.
right.
They are sent by the government.
Well, the
right?
ones that did it right.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of them, I think, were trying to do the right thing.
Absolutely.
But you've got cases like this one
Right.
where they just lay. And I always, my students always look at me like, holy crap, Americans killed people in this village. Yeah, but it was also an American who came in, intervened, stopped it.
In the helicopter.
In the helicopter.
Yeah, right.
So,
Thompson, I
balance
think his
that out
name
a
was,
little
yeah.
bit. Somebody came in and said, screw this, we're not doing this.
It's always that
Yeah.
make a decision that in the
Oh,
heat of the
I can't
whatever.
imagine.
Right.
I can't either.
But I think what your point was is that this war very quickly turns, in the eyes of the public, to be not a popular. I mean,
Right.
nobody really can understand the justification, right? The government's going to keep, U.S. is going to keep
No.
saying domino,
Well-
containment, Soviet Union.
So, pacification,
Right.
escalation, meaning we went from, 100,000 troops or less to over 500,000 by 1968. And then in January of 1968, the North Vietnamese army decided to go ahead and full-time start fighting. And that was the Tet Offensive. And the Tet Offensive was a coordinated effort between the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong in every major city and every major military installation in South Vietnam. And all of a sudden, we are in like a major war.
Full on.
It's urban. It's more there's more casualties. And the
jungle fighting,
television,
like you were talking
television
about.
cameras that were watching guys going out
Well,
into the jungle were now watching full-on firefights
Which I
in the
think
middle
is
of
the
the
other
city.
point that means the American public is going to show so quickly is that it's fully televised.
That's it, right?
Yes.
And you have that embedded journalist, like you just said,
Well,
jumping like in with the troops, with the cameras.
Mhm.
Now everything is caught on film.
Mhm.
People are watching it at dinner. I mean, the nightly news was these. I mean, everybody sat down and watched the
And
nightly
pop
news.
culture is totally against it. I mean, so much music that was against it.
Oh my gosh.
Students were first.
Protests.
Well, students were first,
Yeah.
and then eventually it
Yeah.
becomes like women's rights, civil rights. I mean, everybody kind of jumps on board the anti-establishment, but the war becomes the flashpoint.
What we talked about in 1968.
Yeah, which is
And this was
clearly-
the Tet Offensive and the height of the protest against it all. And it all it was a famous line, right? President Johnson said, if I've lost Mr. Cronkite, I've lost the average. And Walter Cronkite, of course, was a famous journalist on television every night, prime
CBS
time,
News, yeah.
CBS News. And he was like, I don't understand
I
what's
think
going
at
on.
one point the most trusted man
Well,
in America, right?
yeah.
Like, everybody turned to Walter
Yeah.
Cronkite.
Right. And that was before the 24-hour news cycle, which, everybody trusted Cronkite, and then Rather and Brokaw and these guys,
These were facts.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
But I think that's interesting because like the war by 1970 as not only reached escalation, but
Well-
it's also now at a point where are we aware that it's not going to go well?
Yeah. So 68 is a presidential election.
Okay.
And that brings us Richard Nixon. And Nixon is the California governor who's like, hey, remember me? I was vice president for Eisenhower for 8 years. I ran against Kennedy and you picked the young, good looking guy.
Right.
Do you feel like you made a mistake? Because look, I'm all experienced. And he made a great point. It was like, I'm the elder statesman. I know what I'm doing. I want what he called in that campaign, peace with honor. Now, peace with honor meant we're not going to cow down to the counterculture protest movement and just cut and run. We're going to fix this situation. And if you think about it, Nixon was vice president for Eisenhower for 8 years. He wanted to turn the clock back. Let's get out of combat. Let's get back to aid and advisors. Let's get back to supporting the South Vietnamese so that they can defeat the North. And at first, the drawdown of troops, which happened pretty quickly when he took office, made people a little hopeful that maybe we could bring an end to this. And that is when we get to 1970, 71, really, I think, was the Pentagon Papers. And when the Pentagon Papers were published, which were documents from the State Defense Department that basically unclassified, it wasn't really unclassified, it basically divulged the information that was classified about My Lai Massacre, which we mentioned earlier, about bombings in Laos and Cambodia, which are two countries we didn't know we were at war with.
Which technically weren't.
And both Johnson and Nixon were guilty of that.
Right.
But it fell into the public's hands when Nixon was president. And
the bombings of Cambodia and Laos, so were our excuse or our reasoning was we were chasing Viet Cong,
and supply
Vietnamese.
lines.
it was the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Right? The Ho Chi Minh Trail
It wasn't that we were bombing
combination of- right,
Cambodians
right,
necessarily.
Right. We were
But
in
there
the war
were-
in Vietnam by
Right.
bombing Cambodia and Laos. Right.
But both Laos and Cambodia had communist revolutions also
What
happening.
Khmer Rouge
Yeah.
was we can get to eventually too.
Which are the
So
real,
that
probably should
jumps
have been
us-
the real enemies there. Right?
Seriously. So we jump ahead now to the early 70s. I mean, we've got full on student. I mean, the war is clearly popular. Nixon is also becoming more and more unpopular.
Right.
And we've got an election in 72.
Yeah.
Where he wins. Then very quickly
It's
we
pretty
end,
easily.
but then very quickly you end up with like Watergate and a whole series of, and the war now has, I mean, technically it's been 20 years, 54 to 74, but it's been a full decade, 60,000 American soldiers.
I think it was, by the end of it, it was
Right.
around 58.
Well, I was going to say
58,
right
yeah.
at it. So, I mean,
Yeah,
it's
it's just over.
and even people who would once, it's created a divide in the U.S.
Yeah.
Right. There's those who are like establishment, you do what your government says. And now there's this giant group of people going, no.
Am I correct that Paris again is where the peace treaty is?
Yeah.
I mean, every major
really?
war
Yeah,
is in
73.
Paris. Right? Peace treaty.
Seriously, is it at Versailles?
I don't think so. But
So we
Because that
can,
would have been even better.
we can take 2 minutes and talk about the role of Henry
We are fine.
Kissinger.
This is
right?
an episode
Sure.
that might take
Yeah.
a little longer.
Yeah. Kissinger with Nixon as
What do you mean,
his,
Secretary of State.
National Security Advisor and then Secretary of State.
Okay.
The concept, which I think we've discussed before on the podcast, of détente.
yes.
The idea of easing the tension between the Americans and the communists, bringing down some of the rhetoric of the Cold War and easing into a relationship. You may remember we talked about Nixon went to the Soviet Union and visited with Brezhnev.
Yeah, right.
And he went to China and drank tea with Mao and all that. Maybe not the primary purpose of that, but at least a secondary purpose of that was to put some pressure on the communists in Vietnam. And when the communists in Vietnam saw their primary weapons dealer and
Provider.
funder having tea and hanging out with Nixon and smiling and having fun, the North Vietnamese decided it was probably time to sit down at the table.
Okay.
And so the deal that eventually Kissinger helped manufacture in 1973 was really no different than it was in 1968. It wasn't Kissinger's deal, but it was a deal that even the Johnson administration had been working on. And it was to divide Vietnam, 17th parallel, North Vietnam, South Vietnam, return prisoners of war. The United States would pay for some damages, and then all of prisoners, or the United States would leave South Vietnam, which we did. But in the meantime, Nixon was resigned office, right? Like that's where Watergate gets really interesting, because you cheer the Treaty of Paris while the Watergate scandal explodes. That brings in Gerald Ford.
Right.
So here's this congressman from Michigan who wasn't elected to anything, right?
I think the only man never
because-
elected both vice president and
Well,
president.
because so
Spiro Agnew.
Nixon's vice president was
Right.
Spiro Agnew. He resigned on corruption and conspiracy charges and whatever the hell else it was. And here's this guy now. He gets to oversee the end of the war, and you would think that would be a really good thing. Except by April of 1975, the North Vietnamese had invaded the South anyway, as the last American troops were coming out, which is a hell of a scene, right? The last.
That's the image you see of the people walking up the
Exactly.
stairs to the
It's,
helicopter.
literally look up the fall of Saigon. Yeah.
And what I was reading about is that it's such a complete panic
Mhm.
because when Saigon is literally surrounded
Mhm.
and the U.S. has already promised to pull out, but that doesn't include just U.S. troops. That now
Right.
includes
Now it's staff.
U.S.
Mhm.
staff,
Yeah.
but anybody who has supported this sort of South Vietnamese in the U.S. because
Yeah.
if the North Vietnamese take it,
Yeah.
like what Afghanistan to do
Yep.
your things down.
Afghanistan.
But I mean,
Yeah.
you leave these people behind. But I think I said 140,000 people were evacuated
Yeah.
and became refugees, like by helicopter, by ship, by boat to just like American warships off the coast of Vietnam.
Yeah.
You have baby airlifts out, and you've
Yeah.
got
Well, so much of it done by helicopter.
Yeah.
And those
that
guys.
image is amazing.
Yeah, those
Yeah.
those helicopter guys were unbelievable pilots.
Well, and that is why
Mhm.
I think that brought some really weird feelings to people when it happened the same way in Afghanistan a couple of years ago.
Right.
Is
Yeah.
trying to get all those
Mm.
people that we we hired or made friends with to help us, and trying to get everybody out of there that would have otherwise probably been killed. And
Well, I think the best thing about Vietnam too is not the best thing. That's a horrible way to say it, but there are these iconic images, right, that sort of resonate in Americans' brains because it's such a publicly televised war. So the shooting of the general by the South Vietnamese. You've got the Saigon falling. You've got the helicopters.
You could draw up a plan to evacuate people.
Yeah.
And it's never going to go.
no,
It doesn't matter how you do it.
not in
It's
that
not going to go.
situation. No.
Well, in Afghanistan, like you mentioned, I mean, it's just,
Well,
there's no way you're going to get them.
No.
Well, in fact, literally, Saigon is surrounded, right? Like they're closing in on the embassy, so it's a matter of like hours, right?
Well, yeah, it's not like there's troops there to fight.
Right.
The troops are pretty much home.
Gone. Yeah.
Yeah. So
So I don't think I realized that
That's
that far gone.
my parents' age.
Yeah, my parents too.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so, I knew a lot of people who fought just because they were friends of my parents. My parents, I guess, fortunately didn't go. My dad had broken his leg in high school in football, and a leg was an inch shorter than the other, and they didn't think he could march in the jungle.
Yeah.
So they didn't
We had
send
this
him.
conversation. My dad was a medic.
Yeah.
But then I think my mom corrected me on this when I said it last time, clearly wrongly. His eyes or kidney stones, one of the two, got him out of having to go.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's our parents' age. I mean, our parents are what, 80?
My
And
dad
that's
was in
clear.
the Pacific in the Navy and got out in 1963.
So he just missed it.
So just missed it all. Yeah.
Wow.
But that does bring me to like, okay, so the legacy of all this, Korea, Vietnam, and again, I think it's important to look at that together. That is literally our Cold War effort in Asia, not missing out. What's the right way to say that? Like, China became the biggest communist nation, and we failed to stop that.
We didn't have a lot of
We
ways.
didn't contain, right?
Didn't have a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And
right.
then Korea, we at least ended up with a ceasefire.
But you have two.
Yeah.
Right.
And then Vietnam, it's communists. Now they turned out to not be really actually communists,
Right.
which is
But
now
that-
you
but
look
that takes
back,
15
it's like,
15,
right.
20 years to figure
right.
out.
It was the
right?
Cambodians we should have been worried
Right,
about. And
right.
then funny enough, Vietnam and Cambodia ended up at war with each other,
Yes, they did because
which is hilarious.
Vietnam tried
Not
to do it.
really, but
Crushed
Well,
it.
yeah.
Right.
yeah.
Crazy
That's a lot.
controversy.
I mean, that is a lot.
time
yeah.
period.
But you know
Um,
what? I think it's important we did it.
I do too, and it's just a really fascinating time.
Which we probably could just go ahead and without the normal like end of the like who'd you have a drink with, we could probably just be like, you know what? That's a lot.
That is
You know
a lot. That's
who
a
I
ton of
think we
stuff.
should have a drink with is, and I know it's not my
Yeah,
turn.
do it.
Oh,
Is all the veterans,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
I like that.
that went over there for our country.
Or just a fun.
I was kind of thinking the same thing. I have some, everybody has probably still, I would think, if you're our age, especially,
which is old by the way.
but you have an uncle or a grandparent or somebody.
Parents.
Friend's dad.
Parents
Yeah.
in our
The,
age. I mean,
the
like,
good
yeah.
news for us and younger people, gosh, if you're younger than us watching, you really should listen to this. Like, we don't really have the ability to talk to people from the Great Depression or World War II anymore, but we do have the ability to talk to people that served in Vietnam,
Absolutely.
and you really should. Some of the cool, I mean, I say cool in a not a great way, right? But some of the most amazing stories I've ever heard were listening to people from that war talk about some of the shit they had to deal with. Like,
Well, and I'd encourage all of you. I mean, ask your family what have they been a part of. Understand your family history, and understand what your family's history has to do with United States history, world history.
This is recent, bro.
Yeah.
Recent. It's our
Absolutely.
lifetimes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not like
Yeah.
we're talking about something in 300 years ago. We're talking
Yeah.
60 years
can't
ago.
bring back a veteran of the American Revolution, but there are some conflicts we can bring back people and talk to.
That's a that's a really good point.
That's great. I love it.
So, you know what? To our veterans.
Yeah.
All right.
Class dismissed. Thanks, guys.
you.
Appreciate it.